Well, with us this morning to review the papers are political commentator Jo-Anne Nadler and Dilly Hussain, deputy editor of British Muslim news website 5 Pillars. A very good morning to you both. Thanks for being with us. Nice to see you. And we're going to start, Jo-Anne, with the front page of The Sun. I was down in Finsbury Park yesterday, and this story emerged about the imam of the mosque outside where this attack, the attack happened outside his mosque. And clearly, there was a huge amount of anger as this man was wrestled to the ground, but it was the imam who stepped in and said, you know, we have to be really careful and we mustn't act out our retribution on him before the police arrive.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think it's really interesting. Obviously, this story is on the front pages of all the newspapers today, quite rightly. There's a spread, though, in how the story is being treated. And I just wanted to pick The Sun because rather than focus solely on the person that did this, they have quite rightly, as you say, highlighted the heroism and the wisdom of the Imam, Mohammed Mahmood, who I think, from what you say and from the reporting, clearly managed to calm things down insofar as you could under those circumstances, and also to make sure, most critically, that this person, you know, faces the full, proper legal process, and that his actions are exposed through that process. Because,
of course, what's very interesting in this case is that, you know, here is a man who has survived the attack and will be accountable, as opposed to the other attacks that we've seen in London and in Manchester, where, of course, those responsible have been killed.
I think it's important to add also that Imam Mahmood, his heroic and very brave and principled stance in safeguarding the perpetrator, Darren Osborne, was that he wasn't necessarily facing a lynch mob per se, but there were elements and people there who did want to obviously take the law into their own hands, and he obviously took leadership and made sure that Mr. Osborne was safeguarded.
Being attacked.
He was. But you have to appreciate that there was about 200 to 300 people there. We had reporters on the ground. Had that 200 to 300 people all wanted to lynch him, it'd be a completely different story. But there were most definitely certain individuals who wanted to do so, but he took the brave leadership role and made sure that he was restrained until the police attended. My focus, rather, it was on the Times' front page. Forgive me for my cynical comments. I mean, one would read this front page and think, you know, I want to set up a GoFundMe page for the perpetrator. Let me explain to you why. Jobless lone wolf held over attack on mosque. It resonates because similar headlines were published when the tragic murder of Joe Cox took place. And what I want the viewers to understand is that sometimes, in fact many times, when the perpetrator of these crimes tend to be Caucasian, white, non-Muslims, there tends to be a huge focus on them being lone wolves, mentally unwell. I mean, Joe Cox's killer was described as someone who was a gardener, someone who spent a lot of time with his mother. So when you read this, you kind of see the humanizing effect of someone who essentially was hell-bent on driving into and killing people. You have to also remember that his wife was unaware. His neighbour said even the day before the attack, she heard him singing with the children. So the begs.
But we hear similar things with regard to the Islamist extremists. We heard their family stories, and we heard that their wives had no idea.
I'd question how it's reported.
They also described as lone wolf, lone wolf attackers as well.
True, but I'd question the kind of overall humanising coverage of it, right? And if you saw the very initial footage that came out of Finsbury Park on the night, there was this kind of built-up anger as to will there be an equal treatment in the coverage of this attack. So I think that's something very interesting.
Do you think there was equal coverage?
Eventually, yes. Eventually, it took some time, but eventually, I think, you know, the fact that it got called a terrorist attack. But I have my own views with regards to how the legal application and the political usage of the term terrorism. Maybe we can discuss that.
I mean, I say the Times do also talk about the couple of nights before he had been thrown out of a pub because he was quite disgruntled. They've described him as a suspected terrorist. So, I don't know, I do get the impression that they're not necessarily painting somebody who was a good guy.
True, no, sorry, but let's look at headlines. I mean, as people who are well versed in the press, how many of the masses read beyond the first paragraph in the headline, right? I just think to myself, there is a kind of consistent theme for my reading of when, you know, Muslims or people who identify as Muslims carry out similar attacks or worse, and when white Caucasian, and it's very similar. We know about the reality in America, how many of these very unfortunate incidents that we have and how it's covered. There's always a mental state, there's always some kind of, you know, non-ideological grievance. So I think that's very important.
All right, well, let's take a look at another tragedy that happened just a few days before, the Grenfell Tower. Now it looks like they are going to start looking at other cladding and other tower blocks. Is that right, Jo-Anne?
That's right.
See whether there could be any dangers there.
Of course, still a lot of coverage, as there will be, I think, for many, many months in the newspapers. So many issues to follow up and to raise, not least the criminal inquiry that will follow. But yes, in the Telegraph today, we have the story, I suppose, looking ahead to sort of things that might now happen to try and prevent anything like this from ever happening again, and orders from the Department for Communities and Local Government to local authorities to send in samples of cladding on similar buildings and have these tested now for their ability to their flammability issues. And I just wonder how comforting, this obviously is something that has to happen, but I wonder how comforting it is for people living in similar blocks at the moment. Is this enough? Is it happening quickly enough?
Is it too little, too late? I mean, once the damage is done, I mean, when you think about it, £10 million was allocated for renovation for this building. Why fire sprinklers, water sprinklers weren't put in, why they went for the cheaper option for the cladding. These are serious questions that have resulted in serious loss of lives. You know, serious questions have to be asked, and I guess someone's head has to be figuratively rolling. You know, where does the accountability lie?
Yeah.
Does it lie with the council? Does it lie with the proprietors of the building? Does it? Where does it lie?
I think there's accountability in all cases to all of those people that have been involved, unquestionably. But I was a councillor for a while myself in a busy London ward that had tower blocks in it, and I've been thinking this week, well, was I ever really involved in anything to do with fire safety? Did I ask the right questions of officers? And I think anybody who's a councillor now must take it upon themselves to ask questions of officers, because you trust the advice you're given by experts, and you don't necessarily have the technical knowledge yourself to be able to understand about different materials.
Well, I think it's made all of us think, hasn't it, a lot more about even our own personal circumstances in terms of fire safety at home. Just very briefly, Dilly, staying with the same story, yesterday in Finsbury Park I spoke to a policeman who was one of the first on the scene and was clearly traumatised by it. And the paper, The Mirror, focuses on the hero firefighters. Yeah.
I mean, look, it goes without saying, the unsung heroes of both Finsbury Park and what happened at Grenfell Tower was the emergency services. Can you imagine being a firefighter who went into a burning building and the corpses that they must have seen and the children that were coughing blood and had... It's huge trauma. And I think this is something that will stay with the firefighters for the rest of their lives.
Undoubtedly.
And you know, besides the firefighters, also the unsung heroes is the community themselves. People of all faiths and no faith who came together, and the kind of grassroots mobilisation that took place to an extent within 24 hours. Majority of the refuge centres were inundated with aid. But again, another question arose: where was the authority? Where was the council in leading this? Right? Because there's only so much that the public can do without proper coordination, right?
I mean, certainly in the very worst of times, you do see the very best in humanity, and we've certainly seen that over recent days. Stay with us. Thank you for the moment. Plenty more from inside the papers. Dilly, we've got about 30 seconds. A bit of cricket on yesterday.
Absolutely. On Sunday, yes, Pakistan versus India, finals, historic, very political. I was saying to you earlier, you know, at least 20% of the global population from the Indian subcontinent tuned into this match. And it was England versus Pakistan in the semi-finals, Bangladesh versus India in the other semi-finals. It was like reliving the British Raj again. And of course, the empire got kicked out. And it was left with India versus Pakistan. Of being of Bangladeshi descent, I would have liked to have been in the finals. Bangladesh would have been in the finals, but it is what it is. I think it was a fantastic lineup. Pakistan being the underdogs, fantastic win, a historic win. I think it was
great entertainment,
great
fantastic
spectacle.
And from cricket to the back pages, Jackie.
Match that stopped the nation, probably. This story in the Telegraph's carried in a lot of papers today, and I quite liked it. Andy Murray, who starts at Queen's Club later on this afternoon, will donate all the prize money he wins here at Queen's this week to the Grenfell Tower victims. The tournament sources say he's asked for all his prize money to be directed straight there, which means that if he were to win this tournament, which he has before, that would be just short of £350,000. That's a really nice gesture, isn't it?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you both. We'll see you again in the next hour. Well, with us to review the morning papers are political commentator Jo-Anne Nadler and Dilly Hussain, deputy editor of British Muslim news site 5 Pillars. Hello again to you both. Thanks for being back with us. And Jo-Anne, let's start with the Wall Street Journal and its take on the Finsbury Park attack.
Yeah, I thought it was important to actually look at perhaps how Britain is being viewed by colleagues who are writing about us from overseas or for an overseas audience, and it just struck me really as very, very sad reflection on things that, you know, the headline on the Wall Street Journal is this cascade of violence strikes the UK. It's hardly likely to encourage people to want to visit us at the moment, and of course, whilst rightly so, we're all absolutely horrified by events that have been happening here over the last 2 or 3 months. You know, it should be said that they are still very isolated. They have a huge effect on our psyche, obviously, as a nation. But it's still, you know, the emergency services have shown themselves to be totally heroic in all these circumstances. And I just felt there was something about this expression, a cascade of violence, as though it was completely unstoppable, as though we're all sort of under siege. And I don't think that's how British people, I would like to think that's not.
It does also say fraying a nation, and particularly a capital that prides itself on keeping calm and carrying on. Dilly, in your website, you have forums and you have, there's a lot of interactivity on there with readers. What are they saying?
I mean, in terms of you know, the kind of mindless violence that we've seen, especially in this month or the last couple of months in the UK, I mean, this kind of violence is something that's commonly attributed to lands beyond our shores. And it's very unfortunate and very sad and very worrying for everyone that this kind of violence, obviously in an arguably smaller scale, but scary enough, has now landed in Western Europe and the US. So what's happening on 5 Pillars is that we have contributors who are discussing that was there a time where the streets of Britain was once safer than it is now? Because these kind of crimes, they don't, you know, discriminate between faiths or races. It could be my family, it could be Jo-Anne's, it could be yours, it could be anyone. I mean, they don't target specific faiths, and anyone can fall victim to it. So the discussion that's been happening a lot on 5 Pillars is that was there a time where the streets of Britain was once safer than it is now? And if so, what's happened? And obviously, me and Jo-Anne may agree, may disagree on this. I mean, I think the war in Iraq, some of the UK government's shenanigans elsewhere, has had a knock-on effect here. As per the words of Baroness Manningham-Buller, the former chief of MI5, who said if you go into Iraq, there will be ramifications and a blowback here. I'm not saying that's the single lone cause. I mean, there's whole other factors. But the security of the country and Western Europe and America by and large, is something that's changed dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years. And that's something we cannot deny.
I think that's interesting, though. What I was picking up on here was a sense in which this article somehow unfairly and unreasonably contributes to an idea that we're all suddenly feeling as if we're in immediate danger.
You know, I noticed the same thing with American news broadcasters as well, and it's very interesting. If you look at, in the same article, it also adds the Grenfell Tower fire, which of course wasn't a terrorist attack, it was a tragedy. However, in America, they have put it in the same pot. You've got the terror attacks, you've also got the fire. Things are just going quite crazy in the UK.
I don't think it's
right
a particularly helpful tone.
I agree.
Coverage.
I think depending on who you speak to, I think people have different perspectives with regards to how they interpret and perceive these attacks. I mean, some will see it as, okay, well, these things, unfortunately, these things have happened, and we will move on as a unified country, as a unified community, putting our differences aside. Whereas others will think, okay, well, things aren't safe. I can tell you for one thing, there's many mosque leaders, people within the Muslim communities up and down the country that are now thinking, well, hold on, Muslims gather every Friday for congregation, the children go to, you know, Quran classes every evening. What does it take for someone to just jump in a van and just mull through people? And the same for anyone else who's attending concerts or out on a Friday, Saturday night. So people do have those genuine worries.
We know that more security has been offered to those who feel they need it.